Hello, I'm Paddy Delaney, and welcome to Integrated Infrastructure, a podcast dedicated to bringing you news and views from industry leaders involved in the development, design, construction and management of the many built forms that make up Australia's integrated infrastructure. This is episode 12 of Integrated Infrastructure, and this week I'm joined by Ish Ahuja, Planning and Project Controls Manager for New South Wales and the ACT at John Holland. Ish is passionate about infrastructure and passionate about keeping the client's needs at the heart of all decision making around infrastructure. This week, Ish gives us an exciting outlook for Australia's infrastructure market and some wise words around the speed and way in which projects should be brought to market to help Australia out of this current recession. We talk about skill gaps and the opportunities to develop new people into the industry, as well as the differences between schedulers, planners and project control specialists, and much more. Ish has many wise words and a vision for the future and for future generations. I hope you enjoy this podcast. Please like, share, comment and subscribe if you do. So without any further ado, here's my conversation with Ish. Ish, welcome to Integrated Infrastructure. Thanks ever so much for joining me today. As always, why don't we start off with you introducing yourself, telling us a bit about you and where you work and what you do.
Thanks, Patrick. So my name is Ish Ahuja. I'm a chartered civil engineer, and I'm currently working for John Holland as a project controls manager as part of the national infrastructure team, looking after all the infrastructure projects in delivery in New South Wales and ACT.
Fantastic, brilliant. You haven't always worked for Hollands, have you? You had a sort of you've had a long career with a few other companies in Australia and worked on some big projects.
Yeah, so I've always worked with tier one contractors in my past career. So I started my career with Laing O'Rourke as a graduate about 13 years ago in Middle East, and then worked for them for almost 9 years, after which I worked for Siona for just over 2 years. And I've been working with John Holland for almost 3 years this November.
Yeah, fantastic! Congratulations.
Thanks, mate.
We got to know each other about 10 years ago, didn't we? I think I was fresh off the boat from the UK and was out there looking at sort of project control skills and what have you. And it's been an interesting 10 years with all these big projects from oil and gas through to infrastructure now.
It definitely has been a great journey, mate. Like when I landed in Australia in 2010. A lot of the construction companies didn't even have a project controls or planning function. And a lot of the companies used to think that the engineers can do the planning and they can do a lot of the planning on their own. But you need a bit of a consistent approach in how you do planning and project controls. You can't just rely on 20 different individuals doing their planning and project controls in 20 different versions. It just doesn't work in the real world.
Yeah, and Lang's really were on the front foot with that, weren't they? They brought that skill to Australia. That's something that they had heavily in the Middle East, heavily in the UK, and senior people like Steve Bird, who were sort of have pushed that in Australia now.
Yeah, definitely. So I used to report to Steve Bird. So I worked with him for a number of years in Laing O'Rourke. And even now we work for different organizations. We always interact with each other and we always share lessons learned from different projects. The networking, in construction industry is a very small industry. People still have relationships. And I think that's what we need to continue even in future.
Yeah, fantastic. So one of the things we were sort of keen to get into was what's the outlook for civil infrastructure in the next 12 to 24 months? It's a critical time at the moment, isn't it, with COVID and with the way that the economy is and the industry is as well. What do you see on the horizon?
The outlook is pretty good for infrastructure spending in Australia. So if you see the last couple of years, we've spent more than $123 billion on infrastructure projects in the last couple of years. And if you see the next 5 to 7 years, there's over $200 billion that needs to be spent across Australia. Even if you see currently, there are about over $16 billion worth of transport and infrastructure projects in procurement just in New South Wales, and about $12 billion worth of projects in procurement in Victoria. So the future is really, really bright. We are delivering some infrastructure projects which we have never seen in our past generations. Driverless Metro, the Northwest Metro, then we're doing the City and Southwest Metro, then there's Metro West coming soon, Metro Greater West connecting to the new Badgery Creek Airport. There's another mega project. And these are the projects which have never been done in the past. So I'm really, really excited what the future spending on infrastructure projects is going to bring, because with the spending in infrastructure, it will help in building the economy as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've been on quite a few calls with Rod Staples, with the Treasury team for New South Wales in particular, and the story that they have to tell is just fantastic. The opportunities that are going to come along, the projects that are coming. And on the flip side, I'm talking also to a lot of contractors and consultants at the moment, and they're not feeling the work yet. It's not here yet, and things seem to be slow, don't they? Obviously not on your live projects. You're very busy on those, but I think there's some frustration in the market about the speed that these projects are coming to the market at the moment. Would you agree?
But I would my view, and then whatever views I'm going to present today, they're just my personal views and do not represent any views of John Holland or any organization. I personally think rather than rushing to the projects, they should spend a bit of a time what the customer wants. If they keep the customer needs in mind, unfortunately, that will need a bit more time for them in making sure the needs are understood clearly by the government departments and the projects are prioritized accordingly. But I personally think they should not rush to the projects just because of the project's awarded. They should rather focus on which project going to give us the maximum value, because at the end of the day, it's the taxpayers' money. And I think it's really, really critical and important for the government organizations to make the right decisions and informed decisions rather than rushing to the projects. At the same time, from a consultant's point of view, I understand their frustration, but you have to keep the bigger picture in mind. There's a well-known adage, no pain, no gain. So there might be some short-term pain waiting for the projects, but as far as the projects that come to market are the right priorities for the communities that we are building these projects for, I wouldn't mind waiting for extra month or two, but making sure the priorities are correct. We are doing the right infrastructure for our future generations, and we are adapting to the change in infrastructure market as the time progresses.
It's a really good point, and I'm sure that you're right. That doesn't necessarily mean that people aren't worried about. I think the biggest concern is at the moment is that we all know that by the time you get to September, if something isn't in process, the probability is it's not going to happen until next year, because of we all close down for the summer. I wonder whether this year we might see things be a bit more like they were in 2015-16 when the infrastructure boom just kicked off, and everybody ended up working all the way through summer, basically, and then took their holidays at Easter. I hope that's the case.
It will be more of like that, mate. According to my predictability and looking at all the avenues for the projects coming Q3 and Q4 of this year, I think it will be like that. But at the same time, because of COVID, it's a bit challenging because people really looking forward to have a holiday with their family over the Christmas break. So I think there will be a bit of a reluctance from people to work over the Christmas break, and that's totally understandable. But at the same time, I think a lot of the prospects will come to market, as you said, in September, October.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, have a short break and then go on holiday at Easter. That's the way to do it, isn't it?
That's it, mate.
Because the tourism industry needs help as well, and people need to be spending money in Australia. So there's lots of reasons to look at all those different ways of doing things. So, Ish, so we've kind of talked about the opportunities there, and you've sort of named some of those big projects that are on the way, and it is so exciting. But what are the threats to the industry at the moment? We know that this has been called the profitless boom to date, and that's obviously something that I've talked about a lot on this podcast, and my guests have talked a lot about is the risk allocation and those sort of things. And there do seem to be more positive steps from government to to try and address those issues in the future. That's obviously an issue, but you can touch on that. But what other sort of threats do you think are out there at the moment?
If you see the next 3-4 years horizon for the infrastructure spending, the spending that we're going to have in next 3-5 years, we have never seen in the past 20 years. So I think shortage of skilled resources is definitely the number one threat and an opportunity as well, because you can train more and more people to work on the projects. And I would like to challenge everybody when we say he is working on a project despite challenges. I want to create a culture, and even from an organization point of view, John Holland is the same. They want to create a culture where people are motivated to work on projects, not despite challenges, but because of the challenges involved in delivering those projects. And I think that way you will get really, really good culture set on various different projects. I think a lot of the industry, example TAFE and other organizations, they are upskilling people and trying to bridge the gap between the skill set, what's available in the market versus what we need in the future. And the demands will keep on changing. One thing which is going to be constant in infrastructure market is the change. So we need to be adapting to embrace that change and try to be working progressively and changing our methodologies and trying to work with the team to find the best outcomes for any complex issue. And nobody can say what we need now, will that be still valid in 12 months' time? I would say no, because in 12 months' time, the whole world will change. The world we are seeing right now will not be the world we're going to see next 5 to 10 years' time. So I think the biggest opportunity we as a construction team can learn is how to adapt ourselves to adopt new technologies, whether it's digitalization, 4D planning, or whatever. But we need to have more of data-based decision making. So rather than having a subjective argument, which one option will work, which option won't work, let's try to understand what the data is telling us and then analyzing that and then finding the best avenues moving forward. So I'm really excited about that one.
No, that's awesome. And you must have seen a dramatic change from where we were 10 years ago in terms of that information management and capture and use and creation and the ability to make decisions from that to where we are today. But we've still got so much further to go on that as well, haven't we?
Correct. So I think construction as an industry, the innovation has not been as great as manufacturing industry or any other industry. So we are the slowest adopters of any new technology. But I reckon this pandemic or COVID has actually accelerated the adoption of that technology, because if you would have asked a lot of the supervisors who have done construction for the last 20, 30 years, nobody would have thought that you can work, majority of the workforce can work from home remotely or whatever. But now with this COVID, they're actually saying it, people are working from home most of the time, but the productivity has not been impacted to that extent. So it just proves that whatever changes we were supposed to adopt in the next 3 to 5 years, I think COVID has just brought those adoption probably 2-3 years forward, which is really, really great for our industry.
What have been the biggest surprising things for you? I mean, are there any sort of particular apps or pieces of technology that have really made a difference in what you do?
Yeah, so if I compare with what I was doing 5 to 10 years ago with the way we are doing project controls these days, a lot of the solutions these days are more of a cloud-based solution where we are giving the option to the engineers and supervisors to upgrade their site diaries from their mobile phones or the tablets or Surface Pros, whereas 10 years ago, it was all paper-based. And slowly and steadily, more and more functions within all organizations are converting from paper-based to an electronic version, whether it's an expense system, whether it's a site diaries, whether it's a claims letter to your commercial manager. So the more and more adoption we do is much, much better, because that's the only way we can increase our productivity moving forward, by working smarter rather than working harder.
And is Primavera more dynamic now as a program, or do you still have to carry quite a punchy laptop around with you to make that function?
The Primavera P6 is still the main planning tool, but in terms of the project controls and so in our company, we're using a software called Control Pro, which is it's a cloud-based solution, which is very user-friendly. So across all our projects within Australia and New Zealand, we are trying to use Control Pro on most of the projects.
Brilliant.
And it's one consistent way of reporting going to the executives, and they can make an informed decision based on their own value on various different projects.
Fantastic. And I'm talking about skills in the planning and project control space. Do we have enough skills? Do we have enough skills today? And for the work we've got today, do we have the right skills in the industry? And then what's that going to look like when we do get all this sort of big work coming through in the next 3-4 years?
There's definitely a gap there, Patrick. So we need to train more people and get them involved with planning and project controls in future, because if you see the spending 5 years ago versus the spending we're going to have in next 5 years, it's nowhere near. So we definitely need more and more skilled people to work in the construction industry and take planning and project controls to the next level. How we can achieve that, I think we all as an industry need to have a joint effort to train more and more people, do more of a mentoring programs so that they can learn in an informal way what they can do better moving forward. We need to share the lessons learned more transparently and more openly between all the projects rather than reinventing the wheel every single time. If we did something really good on a project 5 years ago, what can we learn from that particular project and apply the same principles on the future project so that we are not starting from the scratch again and again? I think that's the time which a lot of projects lose as a part of the learning curve. And I personally don't feel that on every project there needs to be a learning curve. You can have a learning curve if you're changing a type of a project, but if you're doing a road project, might be a $200 million to a $1 billion job. As far as a road project, there's a lot of lessons learned that you can implement from one project to another rather than having a learning curve on every single project.
Absolutely. We talk about planning, project control, scheduling, all these different sort of phases. I think you and I know what they are because we've spent time talking about them plenty times over the last sort of however many years. But for the benefit of people who get confused by the difference between a scheduler and a planner and a project control specialist, can you put those in boxes for me now?
Yeah, for me personally, a scheduler is someone who's really proficient in using the planning software, whether it's a Microsoft project or a Primavera P6. But schedulers are somebody who generally don't have the experience of working on site, who generally don't understand different construction methodologies. And a lot of the people call them as P6 jockeys. So they are always waiting for the information to be fed to them so that they can press some buttons on their laptop or the Surface Pros to run the software. But they are always shy of asking challenging questions to the construction team. Now, because of the lack of experience working on a particular site, they are always do not feel confident to ask the challenging questions with the leading hand supervisors and engineers. Whereas planners, they can do probably 70-80% of their work on their own. They are very, very proactive. They understand different construction methodologies. You can give them a set of drawings. They can do probably 70-80% of the program on their own, and then they can just go to their construction manager or the engineers to verify the assumptions which they have made while developing a program. But they understand the quantities, how to calculate them. They understand what sort of production rate they should be using based on the planning best practices. And then they are not shy of asking any questions along the journey. So they are very, very proactive. As schedulers, they're always waiting for the information to be spoon-fed to them. So that's the biggest difference I see normally in schedulers and planners. Whereas project controls is the next level where they integrate everything: scope, cost, time into one platform, then analyze the trends, and then inform everybody how the trends are going and what they need to change in their forecast or in future. And if their project is running behind, what can be done to bring the project back on track. So project controls guys bring all the functions under as a conduit under one umbrella, and then they try to work as an integrated function. So that's the key difference I see between schedulers, planners, and project controllers. And if you see how our industry has evolved over the last 10 to 15 years, probably 10, 15 years ago, a lot of the companies that didn't have any budget, also the projects were not as complex as they are in today's world. So in those times, having a scheduler might be sufficient for a project. A scheduler comes once a month, and then you update the monthly program for 2-3 days, and then he goes away, and then he works another job. Whereas these days, as I mentioned previously, the only thing that's constant on infrastructure projects is change. So if we are waiting for the month end to analyze what has changed, that's already too late. You need to be on top of change, not on daily basis, but on hourly basis, even on minutes and minutes. Like, you need to understand what has changed, who has triggered that change. And that's why the change management is the backbone of delivering these complex infrastructure projects of future generations.
Fantastic. And it was really the resources boom that elevated project controls, isn't it? Really, in the fact that they were so complex, and that helped develop those skills in Australia. And a lot of those people who were involved in the big resources projects have now moved into infrastructure.
Yeah, that's correct. And because I think if you see, like, Australia has always been a very lucky country. So in the past, because of the mining boom, I think there was no real constraints of delivering projects within a certain budget. Like, you always had a budget, but whereas these days, we need to get smarter and smarter, and we cannot afford to have low productivity on every project. We need to get better at productivity. We need to get better in adoption of the new technology. But we alone can't do that. The whole industry needs to learn from the past, and then need to learn from the new skill set as well that's coming up in the market. And our young engineers, the graduates, they are very, very smart people. Some of the stuff they can do, that will blow up your mind. So we need to create more opportunities for young and talented people coming from unis or schools, and then trying to give them a career path where they can see themselves progressing in the career, taking the planning and project controls.
Yeah, brilliant. Absolutely right. And have there been any specific curveballs that COVID has produced that have really given you challenges when looking at major programs and plans for projects?
But definitely, COVID has created few challenges across every organization. But we are very lucky in infrastructure. The impact has not been as much as in buildings project, where you've got a lot of more vertical transport. Because infrastructure projects are spread horizontally, you can scatter the teams around on a project and still maintain the same productivity. Whereas in building projects, if you have a limit in how many people can go in a lift or whatever, that creates more challenges. But infrastructure wise, I think as far as the projects are keep going and companies are doing the right things by maintaining the social distancing and having the regular toolbox talks with the people, reiterating, if you feel unwell, don't come to work. I think that way we can get through this hurdle very, very quickly.
Yeah, fantastic. Ish, you've given us some great information there and great foresight and ideas from your experience. I really appreciate you taking the time to come on and have a chat to us today. We are a short form podcast, so we try and keep things relatively contained. And you've already spoken about a few of the things that you're excited about, sort of going forward. But what's the biggest thing? What can you finish us off with in terms of things to look forward to?
And I really look forward to getting involved with more and more infrastructure projects in the future, where we are not building the projects for our current generations, but we build projects for our future generations, so that I can take my kids one day in 10 years' time, 15 years' time, and show them what their dad did 10 years ago, and keeping the customer needs at the core of every decision making, And I'm really, really passionate about that because that's something which a lot of the companies don't consider. They say this, but you have to make sure that that is part of your every decision making sure what customer needs. So if the customer needs are different to what you want to build, then you're not going to be successful business or organization. So keeping the customer needs at the core of everything, I think that's what I'm really excited about.
Yeah, and that's awesome. But what a difficult thing to do at the moment, not knowing what COVID, is going to produce in front of us. Like you said, the world we're in today isn't going to be the same world that we're in 12 months or 24 months or 5 years time.
Now, one thing which you can learn from this COVID, because there's so much uncertainty around, there's something you cannot control it. So I would rather say, rather than focusing on the risk or the challenges COVID has produced, if we just change the attitude and look at the opportunities that COVID has created, I think that will be a much better way of how we can see into our future. Like COVID has brought a lot of opportunities, as I mentioned before, in terms of adoption of new technologies. If you see pretty much every single industry, people are working from home, but there's still very little impact on productivity. There has been some impact, but not to the extent people were anticipating. Similarly, it also has created an opportunity where people are spending a bit of a time with their family, at the same time doing work. People are also saving the commute time. So if you just focus on the positive side, I think you will appreciate we can control only what's in our control. This is something which we can't control on our own. So, as I said, it's evolving day by day. We just need to take one step at a time rather than anticipating what the next 3 months or what next 6 months COVID will look like.
Yeah.
But we're doing pretty good so far in terms of how Australia is managing COVID. Like we are basically leading the way how we are managing COVID across many other countries in Europe and other part of the world. So I really am excited to see how we can finish this as quick as possible and then try to deliver this critical infrastructure for our future generations.
Yeah, brilliant. Ish, what a positive note to finish on as well. And I can't agree with you more. You've given me a bit of an uplift for today. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thanks for having me, Gerd.
No, it's fantastic. Well, look, let's try and talk again. But for now, thank you and goodbye.
Thanks, Bed.
Integrated Infrastructure is powered by North Search, specialists in executive and technical search across engineering, design, construction, property and energy markets in Australia. If you'd like to find out more about North Search or get involved with this podcast, you can click on the links in the show notes or email me directly at the address on the screen. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Integrated Infrastructure. Please tell your friends and colleagues if you did, and we hope to see you again soon.